Welcome back, everyone, to Storytime with Belle. Today, I have a very special guest. You all know Gaston. Well, this version of Gaston is much better than the original. He's quiet, more endearing, cuddly, and best of all, he'll listen to you instead of just interrupting and thinking that you are, well, out of your mind for reading a book without pictures. Now, Gaston will sit right over here, out of the way, while I read to you the next chapter of The Princess Bride. Are you ready? I know I am. Chapter 6, The Festivities. This is one of those chapters where Professor Giorgio of Columbia, the Florinese guru, claims that Morgenstern's satiric genius is at its fullest flower. That's the way this guy talks. Fullest flower, delicious drolleries, on and on. The festival chapter is mostly detailed descriptions of, guess what? Bingo, the festivities. It's like 89 days to the nuptials, and every high muckamuck in Florin has to give a due for the couple, and what Morgenstern fills his pages with is how the various riches of the time entertained. What kind of parties, what kind of food, who did the decorations, how the seating arrangements get settled, that kind of thing. The only interesting part, and it's not worth going through 44 pages for, is that Prince Humperdinck gets more and more interested and mannerly toward Buttercup, cutting down even a little on his hunting activities. And more important, because of the foiling kidnapping attempt, 3 things happened. 1. Everyone is pretty well convinced that the plot was engineered by Gilder. So relations between the countries were more than a little strained. 2. Buttercup is just adored by everybody because the rumors of how she acted very brave and even came through the fire swamp alive. And 3. Prince Humperdinck is, at last, in his own land, a hero. He was never popular, not with his hunting fetish, and leaving the country to kind of rot once his old man got senile. But the way he foiled the kidnapping made everybody realize that this was some brave fella, and they were lucky to have him next in line to lead them. Anyhow, these 44 pages cover just about the first month of a party giving. And it's not till the end that, for my money, things get going again. Buttercup is in bed, pooped, it's late, the end of another long party, and she is waiting for sleep. She wonders what sea Wesley is riding on, and the giant, and the Spaniard. Whatever happened to them? So eventually, in 3 quick flashbacks, Morgenstern returns to what I think is the story. Are you ready for the flashbacks? Here's the first one. When Inigo regained consciousness, it was still night on the cliffs of Insanity. Far below, the waters of the Florin Channel pounded. Inigo stirred, blinked, tried to rub his eyes, couldn't. His arms were tied together around a tree. Inigo blinked again, vanishing cobwebs. He had gone on his knees to the man in black, ready for death. Clearly, the victor had other notions. Inigo looked around as best he could. And there it was, the 6-fingered sword, glittering in the moonlight like lost magic. Inigo stretched his right leg as far as it would go and managed to touch the handle. Then, it was simply a matter of inching the weapon close enough to be graspable by one hand. And then it was an even simpler task to slash his bindings. He was dizzy when he stood, and he rubbed his head behind his ear, where the man in black had struck him. A lump, sizable to be sure, but not a major problem. The major problem was what to do now. Vizzini had strict instructions for occasions such as this, and the plan went wrong. Go back to the beginning. Back to the beginning, and wait for Vizzini, then regroup, replan, start again. Inigo had even made a little rhyme out of it for Fezzik, so the giant would not have problems remembering what to do in times of trouble. Fool, fool, back to the beginning is the rule. Inigo knew precisely where the beginning was. They had gotten the job in Florin City itself, Thieves' Quarter. Vizzini had made arrangements alone, as he always did. He had met with their employer, had accepted the job, had planned it, all in the thieves' quarter. So the thieves' quarter was clearly the place to go. Only Inigo hated it there. Everybody was so dangerous. Big, mean, and muscular. And so what if he was the greatest fencer in the world? Who'd know it to look at him? He looked like a skinny Spanish guy. It might be fun to rob. You couldn't walk around with a sign saying, "Be careful! This is the greatest fencer since the death of the Wizard of Corsica. Do not burgle." Besides, and here Inigo felt deep pain, he wasn't that great a fencer. Not anymore. He couldn't be. Hadn't he just been beaten? Once, true, he had been a titan. But now? What happens here that aren't going to read is the 6-page soliloquy of Inigo, in which Morgenstern, through Inigo, reflects the anguish of fleeting glory. The reason for the soliloquy here is that Morgenstern's previous book had gotten bombed by the critics and also hadn't sold beans. Aside, did you even know that Robert Browning's first book of poems didn't sell one copy? True. Even his mother didn't buy it at her local bookstore. Have you ever heard anything more humiliating? I have. How would you like to have that been Browning, and it's your first book, and you have these secret hopes that now you'll be somebody, established, important. And you give it a week before you ask the publisher how things are going, because you don't want to seem pushy or anything. And then maybe you drop by, and it was all probably very English and understand in those days, but you're Browning, and you chit-chat around a bit before you drop the biggie. Oh, by the way, any notions yet on how my poems might be doing? And then its editor, who has been dreading this moment, probably says, well, you know how it is with poetry these days. Nothing's taking off like it used to. Requires a bit of time for the word to get around. And then, finally, somebody has to say it. None, Bob. Sorry. Bob, no, we haven't yet had a single authenticated sale. We thought for a bit that Hatchard's might be a potential buyer down by Piccadilly, but it didn't quite work out. Sorry, Bob. Of course, we'll keep you posted in the event of a breakthrough. End of aside. Anyway, Inigo finishes his speech in the cliffs and spends the next few hours finding a fisherman who will sail him back to Florence City. Flashback 2. The thieves' quarters were far worse than he remembered. Always before Fezzik had been with him, and they made rhymes, and Fezzik was enough to keep any thief away. Inigo moved panic up the dark streets, desperately afraid. Why this giant fear? What was he afraid of? He sat on a filthy stoop and pondered. Around him there were cries in the night, and from the alehouses vulgar laughter. He was afraid. He realized then, because he sat there, gripping the 6-fingered sword for confidence, he was suddenly back to what he had been before Vizzini had found him. A failure. A man without point, with no attachments to tomorrow. Inigo had not touched brandy in years. Now he felt his fingers fumbling for money. Now he heard his footsteps running toward the nearest alehouse. Now he saw his money on the counter. Now he felt the brandy bottle in his hands. Back to the stoop he ran. He opened the bottle. He smelled the rough brandy. He took a sip. He coughed, took a swallow. He coughed again. He gulped it down and coughed and gulped some more, and half began a smile. His fears were starting to leave him. After all, why should he have been afraid? Have even been afraid? He was Inigo Montoya. The bottle was half gone now. Son of Domenico Montoya. So what was there in the world worth fearing? Now the brandy was gone. How dare fear approach a wizard such as Inigo Montoya? Well, never again. Into the second bottle. Never, 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 never again. He sat alone and confident and strong. His life was straight and fine. He had money enough for brandy, and if you had that, you had the world. The stoop was wretched and bleak. Inigo slept here, quite contented, clutching the bottle in his once trembling hands. Existence was really very simple once you did what you were told. And nothing could be simpler or better than what he had in store. All he had to do was wait and drink until Vizzini came. Fezzik had no idea how long he was unconscious. He only knew he was staggered as he staggered to his feet on the mountain path, that his throat was very sore where the man in black had strangled him. What to do? The plan had all gone wrong. Fezzik closed his eyes, trying to think. There was a proper place to go when plans went wrong, but he couldn't quite remember it. Inigo had even made up a rhyme for him so he wouldn't forget. And now, even with that, he was so stupid he had forgotten. What was it? Was it stupid, stupid, go and wait for Vizzini with Cupid? That rhymed. But where was the Cupid? Dummy, dummy, go out now and fill your tummy. That rhymed too. But what kind of instructions were those? What to do? What to do? Dunce, dunce. Use your brains and do it right for once. No help. Nothing was any help. He had never done anything right, not in his whole life, until Vizzini came. And without another thought, Fezzik ran off into the night after the Sicilian. Vizzini was napping when he got there. He had been drinking wine, dozed off. Fezzik dropped to his knees and placed his hands in prayer position. Vizzini, I'm sorry, he began. Vizzini napped on. Fezzik shook him gently. Vizzini did not wake. Not so gently this time. Nothing. Oh, I see. You're dead, Fezzik said. He stood up. He's dead. Vizzini is, he said softly. And then, with not a bit of help from his brain, a giant scream of panic burst from his throat into the night. Inigo! And he whirled back down the mountain path, because if Inigo was alive, it would be all right. It wouldn't be the same. No, it could never be the same. Be that without Vizzini to order them and insult them as only he could. But at least there would be time for poetry. And when Fezzik reached the cliffs of insanity, he said, Inigo! Inigo! Here I am! To the rocks. And I'm here, Inigo! It's your Fezzik! To the trees. And Inigo! Inigo, answer me, please! All over until there was no other conclusion to draw but that just as there was no Vizzini, so there was also no Inigo. And that was hard. It was, in the point of fact, too hard for Fezzik. So he began to run, crying out, Be with you in a minute, Inigo, he said, and right behind you, Inigo, and hey, Inigo, wait up! Wait up, straight up, which was the way he ran. And wouldn't be fun with rhymes once he and Inigo were together again. After an hour or so of shouting, his throat gave out because he had, after all, been strangled almost to death in the very recent past. Once he ran on and on and on until finally he reached a tiny village and found, just outside, some nice rocks that formed kind of a cave, almost big enough for him to stretch out in. He sat with his back against a rock and his hands around his knees and his throat hurting until the village boys found him. They held their breath and crept as close as they dared. Fezzik hoped they would go away, so he froze, pretending to be back with Inigo. And Inigo would say, Barrel. And Fezzik right quick would come back Carol, and maybe they would sing a little something like Erika said, serenade, and you couldn't stump Fezzik with one so easy because of centigrade. And then Inigo would make a word about the weather, and Fezzik would rhyme it, and that was how it went until the village boys stopped being afraid of him. Fezzik could tell that because they were creeping very close to him now, and all of a sudden yelling their lungs out and making crazy faces. He didn't really blame them. He looked like the kind of person you did that to. Mocked. Poor gentle giant. His clothes were torn, and his throat was gone, and his eyes were wild, and he probably would have yelled too if he had been their age. It was only when they found him funny that he found it, though he did not know the word degrading. No more yelling, just laughter now. Laughter, Fezzik thought. And then he thought, giraffe, because that's all he was to them, some huge funny thing that didn't make much noise. Laughter, giraffe, from now to hereafter. Fezzik huddled up from the cave and tried to look on the bright side. At least they weren't throwing things at him. Not yet, anyway. Wesley awoke chained in a giant cage. His shoulder was beginning to fester from the gnawing and digging that the ruse had done into his flesh. He ignored his discomfort momentarily to try and adjust to his surroundings. He was certainly underground. It was not the lack of windows that made that sure, more the dankness. From somewhere above him now, he could hear animal sounds, an occasional lion roar, the yelp of a cheetah. Shortly after his return to consciousness, the albino reappeared, bloodless, with skin as pale as drying birch. The candlelight that served to illuminate the cage made the albino seem totally like a creature who had never seen the sun. The albino held a tray which carried many things: bandages and food, healing powders and brandy. "Where are we?" from Wesley. A shrug from the albino. "Who are you?" Shrug. That was almost the entirety extent of the fellow's conversation. Wesley asked question after question, while the albino tended and redressed his wound, then fed him food that was warm and surprisingly good and plentiful. Shrug. Shrug. "Who knows I'm here?" Shrug. "Lie. But tell me something. Give me an answer. Who knows I'm here?" Whispered. "I know. They know." "They?" Shrug. "The prince and the count, you mean?" Nod. "That is all?" Nod. "Well, I was brought in when I was half conscious. The count was giving orders, but 3 soldiers were carrying me. They know too." Shake. Whispered. "No." "They're dead. That's what you're saying?" Shrug. "Am I to die then?" Shrug. Wesley lay back on the floor of the giant underground cage, watching as the albino silently reloaded the tray and gilded from sight. If the soldiers were dead, surely it was not unreasonable to assume that he would eventually follow. But if they wanted his erasure, surely it was also not unreasonable to assume that they had not the least intention of doing it immediately. Why else into his wounds? Why return his strength with good, warm food? No. His death would be a while yet. But in the meantime, considering the personalities of his captors, it was finally not unreasonable to assume that they would do their best to make him suffer. Greatly. Wesley closed his eyes. There was pain coming, and he had to be ready for it. He had to prepare his brain. He had to get his mind controlled and safe from their efforts, so that they could not break him. He would not let them break him. He would hold it together against anything and all. if only they gave him sufficient time to make ready. He knew he could defeat the pain. It turned out they gave him sufficient time. It was months before the machine was ready. But they broke him anyway. At the end of the 30th day of festivities, with 60 days more of partying to enjoy, Buttercup was genuinely concerned that she might lack the strength to endure. Smile, smile, hold hands, bow and thank over and over. She was simply exhausted from 1 month. How was she to survive twice that? It turned out, because of the king's health, it would be easy and sad. For with 55 days to go, the Florin began to weaken terribly. Prince Humperdinck ordered new doctors brought in. There was still the last miracle man alive, Max, but since they had fired him long before, bringing him back on the case now was simply not deemed wise. If he was competent then, when the Florin was desperately ill, how could he suddenly be a cure-all now with the Florin dying? The new doctors all agreed on various tried-and-true medications, and within 48 hours of their coming on the case, the king was dead. The wedding date, of course, was unchanged. It wasn't every day a country had a 500th anniversary, but the festivities were either curtailed entirely or vastly cut down. And Prince Humperdinck became, 45 days before the wedding, King of Florin. And that changed everything, because before he had taken nothing but his hunting seriously, and now he had to learn everything, learn to run a country, and he buried himself in books and wise men and how you tax this and when you should tax that and foreign entanglements and who could be trusted and how far with what and with what. And before her lovely eyes, Humperdinck changed from a man of fear and action to one of frenzied wisdom, because he had to get it all straight now before any other country dared interfere with the future of Florin. So the wedding, when it actually took place, was a tiny thing in brief, sandwiched in between ministers' meetings and treasury crisis. And Buttercup spent her first afternoon as queen, wandering around the castle, not knowing what in the world to do with herself. It wasn't until King Humperdinck walked out on the balcony with her to greet the gigantic throng that had spent the day in patient waiting that she realized it had happened. She was the queen. Her life, for whatever it was worth, belonged now to the people. They stood together on the castle balcony, accepting the cheers, the cries, the endless, thunderous hip-hips, until Buttercup said, "Please, may I walk once more among them?" And the king said with a nod that she might, and down she went again. And on the day of the wedding announcement, radiant and alone, and again the people swept apart to let her pass, weeping, cheering, and bowing, and one person booed. On the balcony, watching it all, Humperdinck reacted instantly, gesturing soldiers into the area where the sound had come from, dispatching more troops quickly down to surround the queen, and like clockwork, Buttercup was safe, and the booer apprehended and led away. "Hold a moment," Buttercup said, still shaken by the unexpectedness of what happened. The soldier who held the booer stopped. "Bring her to me," Buttercup said. And in a moment, the booer was right there, eye to eye. It was an ancient woman, withered and bent, and Buttercup thought of all the faces that had gone by in her lifetime. She could not remember this one. "Have we met?" the queen asked. The old one shook her head. "Then why? Why on this day? Why do you insult the queen?" "Because you are not worthy of the cheers," the old woman said. And she was suddenly yelling. "You had love in your hands, and you gave it up for gold." She turned to the crowd. "It is true what I tell you. There was love alongside her in the fire swamp, and she dropped it from her fingers like garbage. And that is what she is. the queen of garbage. I had given my word to the prince, Buttercup began, but the old woman would not be quieted. Ask her how she got through the fire swamp. Ask her if she did it alone. She threw love away to be the queen of grime, the queen of muck. I am old, and life means nothing to me, for I am the only person in this crowd to dare tell the truth. The truth says, bow to the queen of fusilance if you want to, but not I. Cheer the queen of slime and order if you want to, but not I. Rave over the beauty of the queen of cesspools, but not I. Not I. She was advancing on Buttercup now. Take her away, Buttercup ordered. But the soldiers could not stop her, and the old woman kept coming on her, her voice getting louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and Buttercup woke up screaming. She was in her bed, safe, alone, safe. The wedding was still 60 days away. But her nightmares began. The next night, she dreamed of giving birth to her first child and... Interruption, and hey! How about giving Morgenstern credit for a major league fake out there? I mean, didn't you think for a while that at least they really were married? I did. It's one of my biggest memories of my father reading. I had pneumonia, remember? And I was a little better now and madly caught up in the book. And one thing you know when you're 10 is that no matter what, there's gonna be a happy ending. They can sweat all day and all they want and scare you, the authors, but all you know, you just have no doubt that in the long run, justice is going to win out. And Wesley and Buttercup, well, they've had their troubles, sure, but they were going to get married and live happily ever after. I would have bet the family fortune if I found a sucker big enough to take me on. Well, when my father got through that sentence, where the wedding was sandwiched between the ministers' meetings and the treasury whatever, I said, "You read that wrong." My father, this little bald barber, remember that too, and kind of illiterate. Well, you just don't challenge a guy who has trouble reading and says he's read something incorrectly, because that's really threatening. "I'm doing the reading," he said. "I know that, but you got it wrong. She didn't marry the rotten Humperdinck. She marries Wesley." "It says right here," my father began, a little huffy, and he starts going over it again. "You must have skipped a page then. Something. Get it right, huh?" By now he was more than a tiny bit upset. I skipped nothing. I read the words. The words are here. I read them. Good night. And off he went. "Hey, please no," I called after him, but he's stubborn. And next thing, my mother was insane. "Your father says his throat is too sore. I told him not to read so much." And she tucked and fluffed me, and no matter how I battled, it was over. No more story till the next day. I spent the whole night thinking, Buttercup married Humperdinck. It just rocked me. How can I explain it? But the world didn't work that way. Good got attracted to good. Evil you flushed down the John, and that was it. But their marriage, I couldn't make it jibe. God, did I work at it. First I thought that probably Buttercup had this fantastic effect on Humperdinck and turned him into the kind of Wesley. Or maybe Wesley and Humperdinck turned out to be long-lost brothers, and Humperdinck was so happy to let his brother back. He said, "Look, Wesley, I didn't realize who you were when I married her, so I'll do this. I'll divorce her, and you marry her, and that way we'll be happy." To this day, I don't think I was ever more creative. But it didn't take. Something was wrong, and I couldn't lose it. Suddenly there was discontent gnawing away until it had a place big enough to settle in, and then it curled up and stayed there, and it's still inside me lurking as I write this now. The next night, when my father came back to reading, and the marriage turned out to have been Buttercup's dream, I screamed, "I knew it all along! All along I knew it!" And my father said, "So you're happy now? It's all right now. We can please continue?" And I said, "Go." And he did. But I wasn't happy. My ears were happy. I guess my story sense was happy. My heart too. But in my, I suppose you call it soul, there was that damn discontent shaking its dark head. All this was never explained to me till I was in my teens, and there was this great woman who lived in my hometown, Edith Nizer, dead now, and she wrote terrific books about how we screw up our children. Brothers and Sisters was one of her books. The Eldest Child was another, published by Harper. Edith didn't need the plug, seeing it like I said, as she's no longer with us. But if there's any amongst you who are worried that you might not be perfect parents, pick up one of Edith's books while there's still time. I knew her because her kid Ed got his haircuts from my pop, and she was this writer, and by my teens I knew secretly that was the life for me too, except I couldn't tell anybody. It was too embarrassing. Barber's sons, if they hustled, maybe got to be IBM salesmen, but writers? No way. Don't ask me how. But eventually Edith discovered my ambition, and from then on, sometimes we would talk. And I remember once we were having iced tea on the Nezer porch and talking, and just outside the porch was their badminton court. And I was watching some kids play badminton, and Ed had shellacked me, and I left the court for the porch. And as I left the court for the porch, he said, "Don't worry, it'll all work out. You'll get me next time." And I nodded, and Ed said, "And if you don't, you'll beat me at something else." I went to the porch and sipped iced tea with Edith, and Edith was reading this book, and she didn't put it down when she said, "That's not necessarily true, you know." I said, "How do you mean?" That's when she put her book down and looked at me and said, "Life isn't fair, Bill. We tell our children that it is, but it's a terrible thing to do. It's not only a lie, it's a cruel lie. Life is not fair, and it never has been, and it's never going to be." Would you believe that for me, right then, it was like one of those comic books where the light bulb goes off over Mandrake the magician's head? "It isn't," I said, so loud I startled her. "You're right. It's not fair." I was so happy. If I had known to dance, I would have started dancing. Isn't that great? Isn't it just terrific? I think about here, Edith must have thought I was well on my way toward being bonkers. But it meant so much to me to have it said that out and free and flying. That was the discontent I endured the night my father stopped reading. I realized right then. It was the reconciliation I was trying to make and couldn't. And it's what I think this book's about. All the Columbia experts can spiel all they want about the delicious satire. They're crazy. This book says life isn't fair. And I'm telling you, one and all, you better believe it. I got a fat, spoiled son. He's going to nab Mrs. Reingold. And he's always going to be fat. Even if he's skinny, he'll still be fat, and he'll still be spoiled, and life will never be enough to make him happy. And that's my fault, maybe. Make it all my fault if you want. The point is, we're not created equal. For the rich, they sing, life isn't fair. I got a cold wife. She's brilliant. She's stimulating. She's terrific. There's no love. That's okay, too. Just so long as we don't keep expecting everything to somehow even out for us before we die. Look, I'm not about to tell you this book has a tragic ending. I already said in the very first line how it was my favorite book in the world. But there's a lot of bad stuff coming up. Torture you've already been prepared for, but there's worse. There's death coming up, and you better understand this. Some of the wrong people die. Be ready for it. This isn't Curious George uses the potty. Nobody warned me, and it's my own fault. You'll see by what I mean in a little. and it was my mistake. So I'm not letting it happen to you. The wrong people die, some of them. And the reason is this. Life is not fair. Forget all the garbage your parents put out. Remember Morgenstern. You'll be a lot happier. Okay, enough. Back to the next nightmare time. The next night, she dreamed of giving birth to her first child. And it was a girl. A beautiful little girl. And Buttercup said, I'm sorry it wasn't a boy. I know you need an heir. And Humperdinck said, Beloved sweet, don't concern yourself with that. Just look at the glorious child God has given us. And he left Buttercup, held the child to her, and then he left, and Buttercup held the child to her perfect breast, and the child said, Your milk is sour. And Buttercup said, Oh, I'm sorry. And she shifted to the other breast, and the child said, No, this is sour too. And Buttercup said, I don't know what to do. And the baby said, You always know what to do. You always know exactly what to do. You always do exactly what's right for you, and the rest of the world can go hang. And Buttercup said, You mean Wesley? And the baby said, Of course I mean Wesley. And Buttercup explained patiently, I thought he was dead, you see. I'd given my word to your father. And the baby said, I'm dying now. There's no love in your milk. Your milk has killed me. And then the child stiffened and cracked and turned in Buttercup's hands to nothing but dry dust. And Buttercup screamed and screamed, even when she was awake again. With 59 days to go till her marriage, she was screaming. The third nightmare came quickly and following evening. And again, it was a baby. This time a son. A marvelous strong boy. And Humperdinck said, Beloved, it's a boy. And Buttercup said, I didn't fail you. Thank heavens. And then he was gone, and Buttercup called out, May I see my son now? And all the doctors scurried around her royal room. But the boy was not brought in. What seems to be the trouble? Buttercup called out to the chief doctor, and the chief doctor said, I don't quite understand. But he doesn't want to see you. And Buttercup said, Tell him I am his mother, and I am the queen, and I command his presence. And then he was there, just a handsome baby boy as anyone could wish for. Close it, Buttercup said, and the doctor closed the door, and the baby stood in the corner, as far from her bed as he could. Come here, darling, Buttercup said. Why? Are you going to kill me too? I'm your mother, and I love you. Now come here. I've never killed anybody. You killed Wesley. Did you see his face in the fire swamp when you walked away and left him? That's what I call killing. When you're older, you'll understand things. Now, I'm not going to tell you again. Come here. Murderer! The baby shouted. Murderer! But by then, she was out of bed, and she had it in her arms and was saying, Stop that! Stop this instant! I love you. And he said, Your love is poison. It kills. And he died in her arms, and she started to cry. Even she was awake again. With 58 days to go to her marriage, she was still crying. The next night, she simply refused to go to sleep. Instead, she walked and read and did needlework and drank cup after cup of steaming tea from the Indies. She felt sick with weariness, of course, but such was her fear of what she might dream, that she preferred any waking discomfort to whatever sleep might have offered. And at dawn, her mother was pregnant. No, more than pregnant. Her mother was having a baby. And as Buttercup stood in the corner of the room, she watched herself being born, and her father gasped at her beauty, and so did her mother, and the midwife was the first to show concern. The midwife was a sweet woman, known throughout the village for her love of babies, and said, Look, trouble. And the father said, What trouble? Where before did you ever see such a beauty? And the midwife said, Don't you understand why she was given such beauty? It's because she has no heart. Here, listen. The baby is alive, but there is no beat. And she held Buttercup's chest against her father's ear, and the father could only nod and say, We must find a miracle man to place a heart inside her. But the midwife said, "That would be wrong, I think. I've heard of creatures like this, the heartless ones. And as they grow bigger, they get more and more beautiful, and behind them is nothing but broken bodies and shattered souls. And these without hearts are anguish bringers. And my advice would be, since you're both still young, to have another child, a different child, and be rid of this one now. But of course, the decision is up to you." And the father said to the mother, "Well," and the mother said, "since the midwife is the kindest person in the village, she must know what kind of monster. She must know a monster when she sees one. Let's get to it." So Buttercup's father and Buttercup's mother put their hands to the baby's throat, and the baby began to gasp. Even when Buttercup was awake again, at dawn, with 57 days till her marriage, she could not stop gasping. From then on, the nightmares became simply too frightening. When there were 50 days to go, Buttercup knocked one night on the door of Prince Humperdinck's chambers. She entered when he bid her to do so. "I see trouble," he said. "You look very ill." And so she did. Beautiful, of course. Still that, but in no way well. Buttercup did not quite see how to begin. He ushered her into a chair. He got her water. She sipped it, staring dead ahead. He put the glass to one side. "At your convenience, princess," he said. "It comes to this," Buttercup began. "In the fire swamp, I made the worst mistake in the world. I love Wesley. I always have. It seems I always will. I did not know this when you came to me. Please believe what I am about to say. When you said now, I must marry you or face death, I answered, kill me. I meant that. I mean this now too. If you say I must marry you in 50 days, I will be dead by morning." The prince was literally stunned. After a long moment, he knelt by Buttercup's chair, and his gentlest voice started to speak. "I admit that when we first became engaged, there was no love involved. This was as much my choice as yours, though the notion may have come from you. But surely you must have noticed, in the last month of parties and festivities, a certain warming of my attitude. I have. You have been both sweet and noble. Thank you. Having said that, I hope you appreciate how difficult this next sentence is for me to say. I would rather die myself than cause you unhappiness by standing in the way of your marrying the man you love." Buttercup almost wept with gratitude. She said, "I will bless you all my days for your kindness." Then she stood. "So it's settled. Our wedding is off." He stood good too, except for perhaps one thing. That being, have you considered the possibility that he might not now want to marry any longer to marry you? Until that moment she had not. You were, I hate to remind you, not altogether gentle with his emotions in the fire swamp. Forgive me for saying that, beloved, but you did leave him in the lurch, in a manner of speaking. Buttercup sat down hard. Her turn now to be stunned. Humperdinck knelt again beside her. "This Wesley of yours, this sailor boy, he has pride?" Buttercup managed to whisper, "More than any man alive, I sometimes think. But consider this, then, dearest. Here he is, off sailing somewhere with the dread pirate Roberts. He has a month to survive the emotional scars you dealt him. What if he wants to remain single? Or worse, what if he has found another?" Buttercup was now even beyond whispering. "I think, sweetest child, that we should strike a bargain, you and I. If Wesley still wants to marry you still, bless you both. If, for reasons unpleasant to mention, his pride will not let him, then you will marry me as planned and be the Queen of Florin. He wouldn't be married, I'm sure. Not my Wesley," she looked at the prince. "But how can I find out?" "What about this? You write him a letter, telling him everything. We make 4 copies. I take my 4 fastest ships and order them in all directions. The dread pirate Roberts is not often more than a month's sail from Florin. Whichever of my ships finds him will run the white flag of truce delivering your letter, and Wesley can decide. If no, he can speak the message to my captain. If yes, my captain will sail him here to you, and I will have to be content myself somehow with a lesser bride. I'm not sure, but I definitely think that this is the most generous decision I have yet heard. Do me this favor then in return. Until we know Wesley's intentions one way or another, let us continue as we have, so the festivities will not be halted. And if I seem too fond of you, remember that I cannot help myself. Agreed, Buttercup said, going to the door, but not before she kissed his cheek. He followed her. Off with you now, and write your letter. And he returned the kiss, smiling with his eyes on her until the corridor curved her from his sight. There was no doubt whatsoever in his mind that he was going to seem fond of her in the days ahead. Because when she died of murder on their wedding night, it was crucial that all Florin realized the depth of his love, the epical size of his loss. Since there was no one, and since no one would dare hesitate to follow him in the revenge war he was to launch against Gilder. At first, when he hired the Sicilian, he was convinced it was best that someone else do her in. All that while making it appear to be the work of soldiers from Gilder. And while the man in black had somehow materialized to spoil his plans, the prince came close to going insane with rage. Now, he was basically optimistic nature had reasserted itself. Everything was going to work out for the best. The people were infatuated with Buttercup now, as they had never been before her kidnapping. And when he announced from his balcony that she had been murdered, he already saw the scene in his mind. He would arrive just too late to save her from the strangling, but soon enough to see the Gilderian soldiers leaping from the window of his bedroom to the soft ground below. When he made the speech to the masses on the 500th anniversary of his country, well, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the square. And although he was just the least bit perturbed, since he had never actually killed a woman before with his bare hands, there was a first time for everything. Besides, if you wanted something done right, you did it yourself. And we're going to end chapter 6 there. I hope you all are enjoying story times with Belle these days. My real name is Erika F. Shore. I am an actress, a writer, and a costumer. I'm doing this during the COVID pandemic in order to bring a little bit of joy and happiness to all of your lives. Stay safe, stay healthy, and don't forget you are not alone. Thank you and enjoy.